Good. So welcome to the second session. And what we're going to do is have a series of presentations. And we will start, I think, with Francine, and then move through to the other presenters. So I think it's fairly casual. Please store your questions and comments for the end. And we should have about an hour presentation discussion. And at the end, we will have time for further discussion and questions. So good. Thank you. I think Francine, you are then, I think, ready to go. And following you, we will then have Bob. So if Bob can just be ready for that next. Okay, thank you very much. Francine, please go ahead.
Thanks, Prof. Jeremy. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us again this afternoon for a quick chat. I've been asked to look at co-working and co-living in lieu of Prof. Sophie Pelsmakers, who unfortunately cannot be with us today. So I've quickly looked at this topic, but obviously I am not as well versed in the topic as Prof. Sophie is. But luckily for me, I'm in South Africa. So I thought to look at this topic and look at this theme from a South African point of view and perhaps provoke some discussion, perhaps just quickly for 15 minutes, give you my view, and hopefully I'll have a few students, a few lecturers jump on and give me their view as well on co-living and co-working. So when Prof. Jeremy asked me to please jump onto this topic when we needed someone to present, the first thing I did was say, yes, absolutely, I will be your plan B, and that I will profusely apologize for our slip up in getting Prof. Sophie here. But I also looked at the sub-themes, the sub-topics that Prof. Bob also asked us to look at, and that is home working, flexible working spaces and synergies, collective living, communal space, and supporting facilities. And when I look at home working, the first thing I think about is myself in the COVID pandemic. And I remember mid-COVID pandemic, there was this movement on Instagram where one person on Instagram asked everyone to draw out their homes and draw out how they were working in their homes during this pandemic when we couldn't leave our homes, when suddenly everyone was home working. Suddenly everyone was confined to what was usually after hours and their homes. And this was a very, very interesting social experiment that somebody did. His name was Flo Bengert, and you're welcome to go and check on Instagram. And what he did was he asked everyone to use this hashtag, non-stop home office. And it was very interesting, the small little diagrams that came from it and came of it, how everyone expressed how they lived their days out during this pandemic, working from home. The one that I loved the most obviously had a cat, and the cat had a little route from one apartment to the other apartment as well. And this had me thinking with this project that so many third years in South Africa are currently grappling with. And I wondered, what sources would you be looking at if you look at homework and you look at spaces of co-creation and industry at home? And Pinterest, as I scroll through it, I thought that this is not African. This is not what we have in South Africa when we look at how people work and what the context of our South African cities are. So very, very briefly, I felt that I must touch on Pretoria as a post-apartheid city. And I must talk about the segregation that we suffered in this country, where we divided people based on culture, based on the color of their skin, and how we had city centers where some people had more rights than other people, a racial segregation and a physical segregation, moving some people further away from economic activities, work activities, and how this shaped our cities, how that shaped the absolute inequality that we have today when we look at cities, the affluent to the one side, and then those who only have access to the city either by foot or by taxi. And we saw now what happens when taxis also stop going. People are literally walking on highways to get to places of economic activity, to build for themselves a foothold, an economic foothold. And working in South Africa then changed. We had 1994, and suddenly now we have post-apartheid cities. It happened in a moment. 1994, the elections on the 27th of April came and gone, and I woke up, and the next morning Pretoria was a post-apartheid city. But sadly, the physical buildings, the physical roads, the fact that we have to travel very far to get from one place to another place for economic activity, that remained. And from here, I looked at what exactly have we achieved? Because we are still fighting. We are still fighting for housing. We're still fighting for housing in South Africa that will provide people with a socioeconomic foothold, and in addition to that, be sustainable, and in addition to that, provide shelter as well as services, water, electricity, a place to rear children, a place to have community, a place to grow as a country, to grow culture. And from here, I looked at the exact or specific South African context. And what are our needs when we look at working from home in South Africa? And what does that mean in South Africa? What is actually a home? And I'm thinking, if I do a search on the internet, I get all these Starbucks, people laughing. And I'm thinking, this is not how we work in South Africa. When I visited the site, the most predominant feature, the most predominant worker to the site were taxi workers. And I remember living just 3 blocks up from your site to this competition, and how in the block of flats I lived, every evening a taxi would house a taxi driver. That was his home for the night in our parking lot. And that person lived there. They used the bathroom that was available, and it was great for us because it was passive surveillance as well for our home. I lived in a maisonette in Church Street, Stanza Bupape, with about 20 units in it. It's called 20-man court. And I'm thinking that that housing complex that I lived in was also that taxi driver's home. And he was also working from that taxi. And then I also think about the waste reclaimers that used to occupy the site with a sorting facility. This site was their place of work. This is where they worked. And will the housing proposals, the sustainable housing proposals, provide for waste reclaimers as well? Will a part of, or a percentage of, the people living in your development work there full time to perhaps look at waste reclaim and look at a circular approach to the building? And where would these people live? Where would these people work? Where would they rear their kids and grow their families and grow their communities? And I also thought about the informality in South Africa, how so many people are employed by informality in South Africa, but also in Africa at large. And I'm thinking, where are the architects? Where are this food? Is it produced within the city? And what would that work environment look like? And sold within the city, but what would it look like if it is sold within the housing complex or the housing development that it is grown? And then also I'm looking at skills development, and how I found this one article where it says that 80% of jobs in the informal sector is the main source of employment for people in urban Africa. So this informal sector, this might very well be how we live and work in Africa. And then there's, if you've ever lived in Sunnyside or Arcadia, which is adjacent to your site is actually in Arcadia, then this is every day. And this is a service that is given to people in the city. How would this be accommodated? This person, if they have an apartment or a house within this development that you are proposing, how would they serve their community and provide a service? This one here, food growing, I found this space as well. It's a rooftop in Johannesburg, and it deals with food security. And I'm thinking, I think a lot about the World Economic Forum article of a year or two ago, where it stipulates that high-rise buildings are unsustainable. One, cannot build them anymore. Two, we cannot service them anymore. We can only build up to about 4 stories, maybe 6. Pretty much the density or the height of Barcelona or Paris. And then if I look at Arcadia and Sunnyside with the high-rise buildings and all these floor spaces, stories above 6 stories up, and I keep on wondering what will happen to these floors when energy stops, when we no longer have fossil fuels to drive with cars back and forth to transport food. What will happen? How will we utilize the space in the future to come? And then, of course, basic services and the employment and the jobs that come along with that. I lived in Sunnyside just pre-pandemic and for a part of the pandemic as well. And I remember just before the pandemic, just when it started, we had a water security issue. This photo I took it off Twitter, which is now called X, I don't know. But this is the only photo I could find because it seems to not have been published widely in newspapers. And I remember women with children, and you can see one parent there with a child on their hip, waiting in line for people, for a can of water, to wash their child, to wash their clothes. And I'm thinking where I'm living in Hatfield now, we have 2 water pumps. And so Pretoria has such a high water table. And I'm thinking these water pumps and this distribution of water, the people employed on the site where I live in a community as well, it's 1 or 2 hours of their day. So what would that look like if a person or a few people on your development are employed for water, grey water recycling maintenance, borehole water, water from the Oppies River? What would that look like? And what enhancement in quality of life would that afford your development? So this is your site again. This is an extract from the PowerPoint I gave you last week. And you can see Sunnyside and Arcadia, this building typology that we currently have in the city. The roof space for harvesting of sunlight, harvesting of water, and growing of food. And then growing our country, having flexible working spaces and synergies. It is shown that wherever a person has a master and they're an apprentice, we learn our most when we learn from somebody who actually knows what they do. What would these spaces look like? Are you accommodating for flexible working spaces and synergies to occur in your development? Can young people learn skills? Can children learn skills? Can they be involved in seeing the production of the goods that they consume, the production on site of the goods that their parents purchase, and thereby crippling the linear economy and working towards a circular economy? I looked at collective living, people living in communities, and I think a lot about my own childhood and what that looked like in comparison with the childhood children have in the city that I now live in. I lived in a town, not in a city when I grew up. And I remember the streets were our playgrounds. And this is still the case in many informal settlements, in many villages, and many peri-urban areas, and in urban areas in gated communities. But not so much in Sunnyside, not so much in Arcadia, which is where your site is located. And what would that look like for people to sit and talk, for children to play, for people to come together with a common goal? And then supporting facilities. I always think that, especially working from home so extensively during COVID, I missed the garden the most. 15 stories up, I missed connection to the ground, connection to nature. And then lastly, communal spaces. Are you providing for communal spaces where communities to come together, where they can eat together, where they can maintain their homes together, where they can look and create art, when they can grow culture, where they can store some of their goods. And these are the questions that I leave you with. This was a very quick PowerPoint and a very quick discussion, but I hope that we will have many questions at the end regarding this, regarding what does it really mean to have sustainable housing? What other aspects needs to be layered upon the housing for the housing to be sustainable, to ensure that we do not, that we limit these carbon emissions so much associated with human settlements. And with that, I leave you with a reminder. Please join the CIB, the newsletter, and the commissions. And thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Francine. I think, Bob, do you want to go next? I think Ezekiel's also here.
Is he?
Yeah, so Ezekiel, do you want to go next, or do you want Bob to go?
Can Ezekiel go next if he's here?
Okay, Ezekiel?
Ezekiel, are you
Afternoon.
Here?
Yes, I see Ezekiel. You should be able to present and speak. I think you're free. Would you want to speak? You can't hear. You're on. You don't have sound. Okay. My suggestion, Ezekiel, if you don't mind, is maybe Bob goes ahead, and we try and sort out the sound issues. But you're definitely on unmute, so you should be able to come in after that. Okay, so thank you very much, Francine, and welcome to everybody. I see quite a lot of people have joined us. We have Prof. Mbanga, I think, as well, Busi. So we look forward to some quite interesting discussion and contributions towards the end. So next, I think, Bob, can you put on your presentation and I think start?
Can you hear me first of all?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, can you see that?
We can see it, Prof. Bob.
Okay, good. Right, okay. So I'm sorry, we're having some real technical problems today. So I'm not sure what was said before I managed to join, but this is the second of our workshops for the City Centre Sustainable Housing Design Competition. And the objective today was to talk about, or is to talk about, affordable housing and housing design and co-living. So as you can see there, Ezekiel will be speaking in a minute. I'm going to predominantly talk about the design of housing and say a little bit about co-living and co-working as well. So, design of housing. I think that what we're really doing is designing homes for people. So they are constituent of three components. There are human needs, there are the place, then the house itself. And if we think about human needs, we can go to Maslow's hierarchy, the left-hand side. And, you know, we have this hierarchy where we think about the important needs of shelter, of protection. And as we move up, we have, you know, safety. And then it's important for people to feel that they belong. And for everybody to have this notion that they would like to be proud of the place where they live. There's making themselves feel better because of having a good place to live. And then we move on to, I mean, status is a terrible word, but, you know, esteem, feeling better, you know, all those kinds of things because of having a decent place to live. So that's the kind of, you know, human needs part of it. And then there's place and how we define place. We're all seeking a sense of place. We're all seeking somewhere that is different from everywhere else, somewhere that's identifiable. And we can do that through a range of means. We can do it through the actual geography or the ecology or the design or the psychology or sociology. There's all sorts of starting points for how we determine what place is. But we definitely need to think about, how is this good design going to create somewhere which is an attractive place to be, which is different, which is identifiable. And the third aspect is the house. And that's a lot to do with what kind of house it is. And is this a group of houses? Is this apartments? Is it a mixture? What's it made out of? Importantly, and I'll come on to this in a bit, the entrance or the entrances, how you get into the development and how you get into the houses is really important. And of course, so is the arrangement of the spaces internally and externally. And the internal spaces, we're going to come on to hear about affordable housing, but one of the aspects of affordable housing is that you can't have waste space, that you have to deal with the space economically without making it cheap and nasty. So in developing your proposals, we've suggested last time that you might want to think about diagrams. You might want to think about, the way that you develop the proposal. The difficulty with housing, I always think, is that everybody thinks they know about housing because, on the whole, they live in houses. So we know what's required, but actually we should think more fundamentally about it. We should think, about where we need light at certain times of the day, ensuring that we have natural light, hoping that we have some kind of view. So looking at all the different spaces, all the different uses that we might have, and how they link together and what their qualities might be. And then it'd be very useful. One of the things, again, we said last time was not just about showing a product, but showing what the ideas are behind it and how you develop those ideas into the proposal. So, these kind of diagrams are very useful for you to show. It's very important that you show the process. It's important that you show the hierarchy. What are the important routes? What are the important spaces? How they go together, and eventually how they turn into a building. The building is the last part of the process. So, it'd be really good for you to show how you actually got there. What activities did you think were important? What's the relationship between those activities? How they form themselves into spaces, and then ultimately how they become buildings. As I said a bit earlier, one of the things that we are going to need to contend with is that we're dealing on the whole with small spaces. So we need to be very careful, and we need to think a lot about how we divide them up and whether we actually need internal partitions if you're having a small space, and whether we could use things like changes of level to delineate the various uses. If it's a small space, then hopefully there'll be relatively few people in it. It might be that it's a number of small spaces linked together, and I'll come on to that in a minute as well. I don't know if you've seen this design. I think this is absolutely fascinating, showing how you might get into and relate to various levels in the development. I think it would actually be even better if it was done at half levels, but the notion of being able to move outside to an entrance and then maybe to another entrance Francine said just now that maybe the maximum we can do is 4 to 6, if you like, story heights, but if you have different levels, but nevertheless, 4 to 6 story heights. So maybe 3 might be the most we could get to on the outside, and then maybe 1 or 2, inside for the higher parts of the development. But we're certainly looking at that sort of range. So it's how you create these levels and how you get to them and what you do inside and what you do outside and how that has a distinct form to it. I'm moving on to thinking about form more. I'm going to show you some housing from around the world, and I'm deliberately doing it from around the world because I don't want to prejudge the South African context and what you might do on this site. So this is not showing you, examples of what you might do. It's showing you some of the principles that are behind a lot of really good housing. So in Montreal in Canada, this is habitat, which is distinctly about geometry. It's just distinctly about how similar three-dimensional forms can be put on top of each other to, create an overall concept. And the form and external space. On the right-hand side, you can see the way that the buildings are shaped so that they create external space, so that they define it, so they enclose it, so they protect it. And then the other way of seeing that is that when you walk along outside space at ground level, you have this very interesting composition of the space drawing in and then opening out as you walk through it. And containment is really important. The distinct feeling that you're moving into somewhere, and that conversely, the buildings look out onto this space, so that you get a kind of natural surveillance of the space. And at the same time, you feel that you've got a containment of the external space within the site. And moving on to natural surveillance is, it's the various ways that can be done. The casual way of coming out onto balconies so that you can see what's going on within the contained space, where you have individual apartments, maybe houses, maybe, but certainly individual living spaces where you have this inside-outside arrangement that enables you to look out onto the external space. And then if you put that together into a series of containing buildings, you have this kind of rhythm of, so it's important that your designs have depth in the facade, but they also have delineation of where one property moves to the next property. And what we're really trying to avoid is no place. We're trying to avoid not being able to identify where you live, where it doesn't have any identity, where everything looks the same. So you need to think about how you create individuality and identity within a concept. Right, so moving on to entrances, what we need to think about first is how we move from public space to private space, how we move from the streets to the internal. So, we really want to try and avoid having, doors into buildings from the public space, but to have entrances into internal spaces from where we can gain access to the buildings. This one is actually from the northeast of England, and it's one of my favorites in terms of, how you gain access to an upper house, an upper apartment, by having, a door at street level that takes you into a little staircase that then creates a balcony, and actually the entrance door comes off the balcony. So this does a number of things. You know, it enables you to have a front door at an upper level, but it also gives you elements of natural surveillance. And how we achieve ways into places by having spaces between the buildings as entrances. How we move into semi-public, semi-private spaces before we then move into private spaces. Francine mentioned the people quite a lot, and I haven't mentioned people at all, which is not a good thing, because what we're doing is that, you know, ultimately we are designing for the people who are going to use these places and who are going to live there. Okay, so I'll just say a few things about co-living and co-working, the principles of it. So we said from the beginning that we're trying to design a community, and co-living is very much about a residential community. And you can have co-living in a community where people have their own different apartments or houses or whatever it might be, but they could also be within the same dwelling. So one of the principles might be shared housing for people who have similar values. And again, you remember from the beginning that we said it's really important you set out your philosophy for the proposal, what's actually important to you. So it might be that having people with similar values occupying the same spaces might be something that's important to you. Often it's been young professionals sharing costs. It's actually anybody who wants to share costs. Commonly, these are, you know, single people who come together. One of the things it does is it enables the residents to manage their development, manage the place where they live. You know, instead of being imposed on them, you know, they can get together and, you know, determine what happens to the place and how everybody engages with it. It includes communal facilities, which can be functional things, indoor things like laundry. It could be the use of external space. We've mentioned leisure and food growth before, and we'll mention them both again in subsequent workshops. And it involves communal spaces, and communal spaces can be inside or outside, and it often includes self-contained bedrooms where, you know, people have their own toilets and washing facilities off their bedrooms. So one of the ways interpreting this can be a series of self-contained bedrooms that come out onto internal communal space that comes out onto external communal space. It's also very helpful in helping the residents to socialise and to organise their own events. So slightly different from that, but not a lot, is co-working. And this is where people from different organisations or just individuals, you know, come together to work. And it could be a space or a series of spaces that act as collaborative hubs. And once again, these spaces can be inside or outside or both. And once again, it's sharing facilities to reduce costs. It's also sharing expertise in an informal way and exploring new ideas. So it's gathering people together to see how, you know, they might be able to work better, might be able to work more efficiently, might be able to work in a more enjoyable way. And it all has a strong social aspect. And you remember social sustainability is one of the key attributes of this competition. So what it does, it involves flexibility. It's not a rigid organisation. People can become part of it and then move out of it. Others could come in and so on. It fosters a sense of community. It boosts productivity through interaction, people helping each other to do things in better ways, and it helps creativity. Okay, so those are the issues. So, Jeremy, can we move on to Ezekiel now?
Okay, thank you, Bob. And I'm hoping the audio problems with Ezekiel have been sorted out. Ezekiel, do you want to? All right, here it says my mic displays a warning sign. Not sure if the problem is from my side. It says it sounds like Ezekiel may not be able to present. There's some problem on his side.
Does he have some PowerPoints, Jeremy, that he could show us, that you could just run through and then we put them on the share?
Oh, run through without the commentary. That's a good point. Ezekiel, do you want to do that? Do you want to share your screen and show the pictures? And at least we get that. And we'll get potentially questions also through the chat. So do you want to just confirm whether you'd like to do that, Ezekiel? I don't know if you can share your screen.
Can you hear us?
So there's a comment suggestion here. Did you join with audio? I don't know. I think Ezekiel seems to be frozen, so maybe there's a problem with load shedding or the internet. Okay, so I think we're going to keep it fairly informal. And if Ezekiel is able to sort out the problems, he can join us. And then I think maybe we go on with some questions and discussion. Bob, do you think?
Sorry, Jeremy. I mean, hopefully he can join us a bit later. But I think, as somebody said, if he left the meeting and came back and clicked on them, I had great difficulty in joining it, I do have to say. So you can leave and come back in if you can hear us.
Yeah.
Other than that, I'll ask you.
So,
other than that, I'll ask you for your slides, and we'll put them on the SharePoint. Okay, thanks, Jeremy.
Good. Okay, so the suggestion, Ezekiel, is that maybe you log off and log back in, and then see if you can share when you log back in, and then we'll know you're back and you can share the slides. Good. Okay. Well, I think then what we'll do is we'll go to discussion. But before that, I just want to welcome a couple of people who have been very instrumental in getting the competition off the ground. Prof. Mbanga, and I think Busi as well is here. So maybe while we're waiting, Prof. Mbanga, do you just want to introduce yourself and maybe just give a bit of background in terms of your work and human settlements? Prof. Mbanga, would you like to do that?
Thank you, Jerry, and also a good afternoon, evening, colleagues and students. I am Mr. Mbanga. I am based in Nelson Mandela University in the School of Built Environment and Civil Engineering in the Department of Buildings and Human Settlements. I'm basically also leading a chair for human settlements in the university. Our department offers programs in construction, quantity surveying, and of course project management, but I'm more on the human settlement program in our department. With regards to the chair, it's a ministry endowed chair. It's got an education component in it, which is introducing human settlement programs. I think we started around 2012 in the country. There's been housing programs previously. We know UKZN, master's program at VES, and also UCT, and also other universities. But there was a need to transition to a human settlement program. Francine raised that question around what then becomes sustainability as it relates to human settlements. So we've got such programs which are multidisciplinary. They cut across the disciplines of planning, a bit of construction, project management, we do property, real estate issues in our program, and of course the conventional accounting, statistics, and all others. But critically, it includes sociology of development, and yeah, that's the program. We also offer masters, but by research, and we do some PhD studies, but under construction management for now. That's part of education, but then there is also the research components, which is more on sustainability issues around human settlement, whether you take it from the macro level of issues around planning, macro meso issues at planning. If you take the forms of human settlements again, you look at neighborhoods, you look at site and approach at level, what becomes sustainability issues that you need to look at with regards to that area. So a lot of research is happening in that space. Of course, we also engage on what we call demonstration work, where we work with different stakeholders and partners, locally, internationally, on demonstrating some sustainability solutions. But our current focus now is on the responses to climate change effects, and more so around green building, green construction, looking on issues of water, energy for low-income settlements. So that's the work that we're doing currently in Caledon Sea in the Eastern Cape, and a municipality called Ndlambe, where we've come up with a concept of a green village, working with some universities in Germany and also some vocational institutes, where we, within an informal settlement, we are trying to do some kind of a retrofit, looking on how in the upgrading of a traditional informal settlement, we can bring in elements or principles of green building, look on issues of design, the space itself, where we look on issues of landscaping towards green landscaping as a focus within that settlement space. We then look also on the houses, the design, their arrangement. I think what Bob was raising here, how do we do that practically, working within the existing planning and building regulations also in a municipality. We look on how do we respond to issue of stormwater drainage. The site that I have is also a low-level site, which required of us to look on ecological sound stormwater management systems, and how do we do with that catchment of water? Do we throw it to follow the other, or do we capture it and store it for other uses, like in urban agriculture, where we have got a communal communal gardening within that site, where communities are also trained on issues of how they can grow vegetables, of course, looking on climate, global warming issues, organic foods, and the like, as an element of crop production to respond to food hunger. We'll come back to the structures, to the building themselves. We have to look on issues of energy, the green building, net zero issues around the construction materials that we are using, maybe departing from brick and mortar, looking for innovative walling systems themselves. But then we have to look into that space as well. And then as we look in that space of the walling systems, and we then have to look on the more so like nature-based planning solutions around the house itself, the building itself. How can it be designed so that it does not attract more use of energy around air condition, warming the house itself? So we test that in a low-income settlement through also house design. But maybe lastly, Jerry, I mean, just conclude by saying that sustainability, we also look within a house or a home. How do we manage the water resources? in a situation where there are water scarce communities or areas due to drought, as a climate change issue, we believe that we cannot rely on clean water for all domestic uses, and we've been looking on issues of we've got a grey water purification system donated by Germany within that settlement. There's a community center that houses the technologies, but it has got all other functionalities. So we look on water, and therefore we wanted we kind of channel the water from the homes that are selected to the MPCC itself. It gets purified, it gets redirected or back to those houses. It's work under progress. It will be followed by studies anyway. The intention is to talk about hybrid water supply within a home, maybe a solution given the challenges where your laundry is there and your gardening might make use of that type of water system. Similarly with electricity, South Africa, with load shedding, the challenge around the grid, we might not be able to move completely from the grid from low-income settlements, but more hybrid solutions that combine electricity with renewable energy. In this instance, we're looking on solar. But then we'll have to look on the household behavior, also on energy uses. Are there no other appliances for water capture and decomposition? Are there no other appliances that within the kitchen that can be utilized for efficient energy use? So and that involves training and also awareness raising and environmental education broadly. That's maybe I might have to pause there. Yes, yes. That's the space.
Thank you. I'm very glad you joined us. We know you're very busy. I think you were in Accra recently and Cape Town, etc. So I think if anybody is interested in some of the technologies that have been being explored by Prof. Mbanga with the range of different partners that he's working on, I think do Google or get in touch with us and we can give contact details. But some very interesting work, and has been very instrumental really in working with the NHBRC and kind of getting this competition going. Just to check, is there someone from the NHBRC that we can welcome, or shall we go to questions?
Well, Boozy was here.
Yeah, just checking. Anyone from the NHBRC that want to just say hello to everybody, or shall we? Okay. I think then let's go to, let's have a last go with, is Ezekiel here, or shall we open to questions? Boosie, yeah. Boosie, we can't hear you. I think you might be on mute, Boosie. Let me just see. Boosie, do you want to say hello? Right, we seem to be having technology issues. All right, I think Boosie will say hello if she can join us. Let's then I think open to questions. The way we're going to run the questions is that you can either decide to write in the chat your question, or you can stick your hand up and unmute yourself and ask the question. I think I will try and see you and then just ask you to go on mute and ask your question. Okay, so let's get going. Any questions? So thank you for the presentations. We've had 3 presentations. So Prof. Mbanga was put in some very interesting ideas, I think, to finish off on. Let's open for questions. Any questions from tutors, students on kind of what we've covered, and really around kind of core issues about what is housing, what is a house, how in this site, in kind of the way conditions have evolved through COVID, through work, we're starting to change the kind of working and living patterns, and how does that influence the way we design housing, the way we manage housing. So I think quite a few ideas have been shared. And remember, this competition is very much about ideas. So as Bob mentioned, when you put in your entry, your proposal, be explicit. Talk about your ideas, and then show how very good, clearly presented ideas filter through into the detail, filter through into the designs, into the mix in terms of who lives there, who works there, how do they work, how does this fit in with the local community, and you know, that's what you present. There are many different ways of presenting. What we'll do in the next set of presentations is talk potentially a little bit more in terms of kind of quantified data and criteria that you might want to present against and look at in some detail. So good. Have we got any questions? I think there were lots of questions last time, so potentially everybody's asked their questions and they don't have any more. In that case, let me then just ask Francine, Bob, do you want to kind of add any additional comments?
I think that we should have given Prof. Mbanga a presentation slot. I would have loved to see the work that he's busy with. It sounds extremely interesting. And I would definitely recommend everyone to go and follow him on LinkedIn. I follow him on LinkedIn, and the reposts are very, very interesting. That's something I will definitely say. There's always something controversial. It's
Prof. Mbanga, I think maybe do you want to just share I think the latest, some of the kind of latest things that you're looking at, just while we look for questions. Yeah.
Oh yeah, thanks, Francine. Thanks for that. I will share the Ntakirutimana village. Of course, work with other stakeholders, CSIR and IPRC, human settlements on that one. I will share the link to that work as well. But also on LinkedIn, is Prof. Mbanga, PhD. I think you can pick me up on LinkedIn. There are interesting and controversial discussions. Of course, there's some instances going on in that space of LinkedIn. The current discussion is exactly on the context that Francine mapped in the beginning around the South Africa's context and its origins and where we come from with regards to how our spaces and places are, and as they were informed by policy and therefore codes and regulations at the time, and what in the post-apartheid state, how much have we shifted with regards to segregationist kind of planning systems. And I was saying that this is a question that I've, in my induction, I mean, in the chair, I work with different colleagues, professions. It's the nature of human settlements that you may have to talk with theologians as well at a certain point in time. So the discussion currently is around exactly the issue Francine was raising. More controversially though, because it's looking on regulations and governance, and why is a planner and the architect of today and not taking responsibility for the type and the spaces or urban forms that have emerged in the democratic state in South Africa. Why is that the professional not taking responsibility for perpetuating the type of forms we've seen that are creating economic burdens and social burdens to the poor in particular? That's where the discourse is currently sitting. Of course, it's around issues of regulations, but the intentions about really looking into innovations, deliberately, I think the discussion seeks to bring different stakeholders and professionals and actors. I think including politicians, if you want to you may say, who would interfere with the process of planning in some way in terms of locational decisions. Where should houses be in a city maybe, and therefore resourcing thereof. The discussions about bringing those all in, but at the end of the day, who should play a leading role in facilitating the type of spaces and places would require? Then it comes back to the built environment professionals, in particular the planner, the architect. Where are we? I would just say there's some of the controversial discussions that are in place, that are taking place right at the moment. I mean, just want to comment on the other issue, maybe just moving from that to the issue of co-living and co-working, I think, and perhaps the proposals. Something we may have to note is that the context, in our context, maybe not only South Africa, Africa, as I'm also participating in the Pan-African City Scholars Network at this point in time. Right now, from today until Friday, I'm involved in the Inclusive Cities conference led by UKZN, UJ, and other universities right now. It's an online conference underway. The issue of co-living and co-working, I think Francine spoke to that relative to informal and informal and formal kind of planning systems and places. Something we would need to note is that the issue of home I'm not sure, Bob, your view on that, of home working is not necessarily new or hasn't been triggered much by COVID-19 in the informal economy, because I've got a dual economy as well, the linear economy that want to transition to circular economy. The formal economy tends to be trapped in so many issues. The informal economy, if you look to your informal waste picker, who is keeping bottles and other materials in the dining room at Ecopunity Township in Caledon-C right now, in order for those to be collected by a company and therefore for them to be processed as part of the circular economy. That has been happening historically in an African home, if we call it like that, or it has in the township and rural home. That has always been happening in terms of shared uses or spaces. The question could be, how can we then bring that closer to the city center in looking into more sustainable design? How can we embrace that rather than criminalize it as zoning schemes and other codes may want, or building codes may want to do? How can we embrace what works for the economy to support the economy? You look on your mechanics, you can look on your mechanics, you can look on your medical practitioners, I mean, who are their surgeries, the home and the working space. You can look on your organizational psychologists, your counseling psychologists. I mean, right at the suburban spaces, even in gated communities, the shared spaces that they do. How can we perhaps embrace that and elevate it to a home level or a settlement level or a neighborhood level? Embrace it and have that even influencing policies and regulations. Not see it much as a problem for a developing economy but embrace it so that it can help us in propelling the economy further. I wanted just to make that comment because rural and township, we see a bit this happening, and it has been happening quite historically as well. Maybe that would be my comment. I know there are issues socially, like exercising and the promotion of cultural rights and how that talks to spaces outside the house. And I think that's an issue around the Pan-African city and space issues right now. Yes. And the fact that myself in person has to maintain 2 homes, one in Gqeberha, Port Elizabeth, and one back in the rural village in Ward 8 of Ntakirutimana, because there are certain activities I cannot engage in a city space. How can we redesign the space? Yeah. Thank you very much.
I have a quick question, if I may, Jeremy. I've got a quick question for everybody on the call. I'm expecting that you have started now with your projects, and I'm expecting that, one, you're having troubles because the site is so extremely large, and I'm expecting that, two, you're having troubles because the solution you are asked for doesn't exist yet. And I want to ask if anybody on the call feels that way. Just give a thumbs up or a clap if any of you are overwhelmed by the size, or any of you are overwhelmed by the task. Let's just see if there's anyone. Okay, that's a good thing.
Clapping hands.
Yeah, I've seen. Yeah. And the reason for that, I think, if I could hypothesize, is our post-apartheid city, our apartheid city was designed by architects. That's the problem. Us architects, we designed it. Our ingenious ideas is what segregated these people, that segregated us. And now we're sitting with the results of this. So I'm expecting that you would feel like you don't know what to do because there are no precedents. There are no real, nothing to step back on. So my advice to you is, that's a great if you're feeling that way. If you're feeling uncomfortable, if you're feeling unsure, if you're feeling like your ideas are too way out. I think that if anybody here feels like that, it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. That's my 2 cents on. Because we need you. Okay. We need you to give us those solutions. I don't have it. I need you to give it to me. No.
I think that's a very important point. This is about thinking. It's about new models, new ideas. And I think, just to pick up on Prof. Mbanga's contributions, as Francine mentioned, apartheid designed these cities. What is interesting now is the pushback. Are regulations too severe for affordable housing? Very interesting at the moment. There's a whole discussion around that. Some NGOs in Cape Town are really driving some questions about what are appropriate building regulations. So if you look at 10400 XA, very stringent requirements for housing in colder climates, etc. And what does that mean for the affordability of lower cost affordable housing? So that's partly what I think Prof. Mbanga mentioned, is this whole question about regulations and how do we accommodate alternative materials, more affordable construction and spaces. So that's the first thing. The second thing that's very interesting, and I think this is also what Francine mentioned, is why you may be having some interesting thoughts and discussions, is it is an African city. It's becoming more an African city. And if you look at culture, there are a lot of activities and things that happen in traditional homesteads. Prof. Mbanga mentioned this. How does that translate into city centers, existing city centers? How do we accommodate that? How do we make it work? So it isn't a source of friction. If any of you live in sectional title, there are probably, some kind of fairly major issues that sometimes happen because different cultures aren't accommodated easily. So I think that was another very interesting comment I think Prof. Mbanga made. And then really one of the other things is the idea of circular economy. So the circular economy is really actually a traditional model. It's the way a lot of buildings used to be built. They were extremely circular. And we've moved to a linear model. And the big question is, how do we move back to much more linear ways of doing things, ways of looking at construction materials, looking at operations, looking at activities around housing, so that we have the right mix of activities, so that you have very efficient, low waste ecosystems that work very well. So, Prof. Mbanga, thank you very much, I think, for your comments, and hopefully that enriches some of the ideas that come through. We're looking forward to also getting your comments, I think, on the results.
Can I say a few things, Jeremy?
Yeah, you want to comment?
Yeah, you know, there's been mention of home working and co-working. Of course, they've both been around forever. You know, since people, you know, first inhabited the planet, there's been home working and co-working. It took a bit of a bashing through the industrial era, but it was still there. And it's been highlighted recently because of COVID, but that's only slightly different form. So it's always been there. Possibly what hasn't happened is that people haven't really thought about it as somewhere that, or something that might be incorporated into the design of housing. Maybe it's just occurred. Maybe that, you know, home working in particular has just you know, taken up space in a home that already existed. So I think the difference here is, you know, how do we accommodate particularly co-working, but possibly home working, you know, within the development? How do we make this development a community? I'm not saying it will be self-sufficient, but it could have you know, aspects where the work of the people who are living in the community, who are located in this community, you know, is actually contributing to the community. One or two other points is that I would get too hung up on regulations. You know, I mean, I've never thought they were that important in ideas competitions. And my feeling is that regulations follow ideas. If you get hung up on the regulations, you'll never have any good ideas. So, you know, I'd be very cautious about following regulations. The third and fourth things are that, well, first of all, you know, mention about the site. I think what you need to consider is how much do you want to build on this site? You know, how much of the site should be covered by building? And I'll give you a clue. The more that you build on it, the more complicated it will get. And arguably, the less useful it will get. So, you know, think about not over-densifying the building. Think about keeping the building simple and using the external space and using the interaction between the internal and external space. And the final point to make is that already there is massive complexity in the issues that have been discussed, and there'll be more. And if you take them all on board, you'll never deal with any of them. So what you need to do is to listen to what you've heard about the various issues, and there've been, you know, legion already. And what you need to do is pick out a very small number that you think you would like to explore. So, you know, don't become overwhelmed by either the site, because you can reduce the amount of building, which makes it much simpler, or about the number of issues, because you need to choose the very few that are important to you. Okay?
Okay, no, thank you, Bob. I think that's extremely good advice. So the huge difference between being a student and being in the work environment is that you've got this opportunity to explore. And what we want in this competition is for you to really explore new ideas, not to be restricted, and to develop something that maybe you take with you, you share later in life, and it really kind of develops a theme or a set of ideas that might form your career. So treat it really as a kind of research opportunity that you can really challenge a lot of the norms, a lot of the current thinking. You can stimulate discussions with your tutors, with your fellow students, maybe other departments. So if you are interested in ecology, go and talk to the ecologists. And if you're interested in culture, go and look at culture, go and look at how that's explored. So I think what Bob is saying that's also very important is don't overload the entry. Choose 2 or 3 really powerful ideas and work them up in a lot of detail and in a very rigorous way in your project. I see there's a couple of questions. Judith, do you want to ask your question or shall I read it out? Judith or Joe? Are you there? I don't see you.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
You do.
Good
Okay. Go ahead and ask your question. Thanks.
Yeah, not really a question, just a comment to say that it's the complexities, socioeconomic complexities, sociocultural complexities that are part of housing and human settlements in the transforming city. And I think even the whole idea of the circular economy and where does it start from, where is base, where does it end? When we say we are home, where is home? And that whole debate. So those kind of thoughts, I think, makes it quite interesting to see why we would focus on one aspect of housing and human settlements and leave the other out. You know, I think it's yeah, it would be good to see what the students come up with.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for that. I think one of the things that the point you make that really is important is where does home start? And one of the examples, if you do a search on co-living spaces, there's some amazing examples in London, Scandinavia, New York, San Francisco, where home is basically a room. So even fairly wealthy professionals choose to live just within one room. So they have a comfortable bed and maybe a bathroom, but all the rest of the spaces are shared. So they've got very nice kitchens, but they're communal kitchens. You cook together, you have workshops, there are gyms, there's small businesses, there are gardens, etc. So have a look at that. We can question the models of what housing should look like, and whether they should be individual units with conventional set of activities, or they could be far smaller rooms and a lot of shared spaces. So yeah, no, thanks for that point. I see Prof. Mbanga's shared also a couple of websites. Busi from the NHBRC has also commented. She may join, I think, one of the future discussions.
What? I think everyone just make sure you're on mute, please.
I've just muted. So yeah, please put yourself on mute. And any last questions, and then I think we're going to wrap up fairly soon. So last questions and maybe also last comments. We'll do a quick round before
Jeremy, has Ezekiel given up?
I don't see him. I was looking for him just now.
Right. Okay.
Ezekiel? Yeah, I don't see him. He might be able to join on a future one or share slides.
Yeah, I'll ask him.
I think that might be the best thing.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, Bob, last comments, and then I will just talk a little bit about the next session before we close. Any last comments from your side, Bob?
All I would say is that I think that everybody should look through the slides of the presentation. So we're only halfway through the workshop, so there will be a lot of information, and only to reiterate that it can seem overwhelming, but you just need to choose what it is that's important to you and focus on that, and don't be overwhelmed by all the rest of it.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. No, thank you very much, Bob. Any last comments? I think Francine, from your side.
From my side as well, I just want to agree with Prof. Bob there as well. Currently, the site is empty. It is underutilized. So even if students place low-cost housing units on it, it will be an improvement on what is currently there. So anything is an improvement on what we have. So don't be too fixated on having the perfect idea. Rather, give us an idea that is yours and that you have well resolved. And then, thank you to everyone for joining us today.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Prof. Mbanga, any quick last remarks before we close? I don't know if you have any last comments.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm fairly covered. It was also good to join this session. I couldn't join the first one due to travels. Apologies. Yeah, just to say that I'm also looking forward to the students and also the tutors' participation in this competition. Yeah, trying to find some innovation solutions. I may just say that maybe, I know it's not in the brief. Just be innovative, just be creative, and just seem to understand the city. It's in Tshwane, the site, but maybe the innovation can be replicated in other spaces or elements of it. It will be a work of value that might interest both private developers and government agencies. It's something that we would love to see some of that contribution being taken through the systems of transforming our cities to better space and places. Otherwise, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Mbanga. I think that's also a very good point, is that your work, we're aiming to get good exposure. Prof. Mbanga's got extremely good connections to human settlements, Department of Human Settlements. There are many people quite interested in new ideas. Winners, but also just interesting approaches, we'll try and raise the profile of and get good exposure, social media, and share that information so that there's we share your work very widely. There's one last message.
One last point.
Thank you,
Jeremy.
Yeah, okay.
We've said this lots of times already, but I'm still going to say it again, is there is no right answer to this competition. What we're looking for is a range of ideas, and nobody's ideas will be excluded. All ideas are interesting.
Great. Okay, so I think I'm going to bring it to a close. Just to let you know that the next workshop session, we're going to cover sustainability. We're going to look at environmental sustainability. I'll talk about that. We'll talk about social sustainability. We've got Gita Govan, who's done extremely interesting work over the last 20, 30 years. And we've got Francine, who you know from here, who will talk about economic sustainability. So it should be a very interesting session, and we look forward to you all coming back in 2 weeks' time. So thank you very much, and see you all in 2 weeks' time.